I just want to acknowledge some funding sources and some colleagues. So the first study I'll talk to you about was funded by Fulbright Canada and a grant from the University of Washington, Tacoma. And the second study is funded by the National Institutes of Health. My Canadian colleagues include David Brennan from U of T, Charles Ferlot from McMaster, Leslie Harris, and Christina Pierpioli. I never say her name right. I'm glad she's not here. From the U.S. And the U.S., my U.S. study colleagues include Karen Fredrickson Goldson and Hyun-Jun Kim from University of Washington. Okay. So we know that aging with HIV is a complex, multifaceted process that we've heard about today, and we really know that from our own work. That there's physical, psychological, and social resources, or lack thereof, that create both risk and protective factors associated with adaptation to aging. A variety of studies have found that a strong social support network is protective in this population and has been associated with decreased HIV stigma, greater quality of life, and decreased loneliness. We know less, though, about the interpersonal resources at a more macro or community level. What's the role of community engagement in the aging process? So when we think about social support, we usually think about it in the context of formal and informal support, and the idea is that the person with HIV is the recipient of that support. And what that view lacks is the idea and the importance of reciprocity. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit about today. So what I'd like to focus on today for the few minutes I have is what's the role of social connectedness, including social support and community engagement in the process of aging with HIV. I'm going to present results from two studies, one conducted here in Toronto and Hamilton, and one in the U.S. The Canadian study approached this from a qualitative lens, while the U.S. study used survey data from the National Health, Aging, Sexuality, and Gender Study. Am I in the right place? So the first study was based here in Ontario, Canada. It was completed in 2013. It was qualitative in nature and used a modified grounded theory approach. And we looked at what I'm focusing on today is this part of social connectedness that contributed to successful aging. We conducted 30 in-depth interviews with adults 50 and over living in Toronto and Hamilton. So there's three themes I just want to talk briefly a bit. The first one shouldn't be really any surprise to anyone, and that was the importance of building and maintaining social support. People talked about the importance of friends, family, partners, lovers, HIV community, and providers. But perhaps what's tricky here is the idea of building and maintaining. So as we lose our social support network, how easy is it for folks to rebuild that? Now we know from the gerontological literature that it's much more difficult for men somehow to rebuild and maintain social networks. That wasn't a huge surprise. But the next two things I thought were really interesting. The second theme we ended up calling pruning. And I have to tell you, I grew up on a farm in a vineyard, and every fall we go through the grapevines and we cut off the wood. We cut off the canes to make the grapevines more healthy. And that's what I was struck with. And people talked about bigger isn't better, so a bigger social network doesn't mean a better social network. They talked about the appraisal of benefits and letting go of people who weren't good for them. One person said, I expect a lot from myself because you have to garner respect for yourself, and that means choosing the right people that you associate with. It also meant, for a lot of the folks I talked to, getting rid of folks who aren't good for you. So sort of shedding yourself of people that were in your social network that weren't necessarily healthy. But the other part that I ended up being really important here is the idea of generativity, or giving back, and giving back to your peers, giving back to the community, and giving back to younger generations. It comes through the idea of individuality, or placing something of the self with others. That in fact we are socially embedded and sociocentric. And earlier today, Dr. Harding asked the question, how individual or interdependent are we, and what is the lens, and how do we see that? I found in the folks I talked to high levels of volunteerism, often but not always associated with working with AIDS service organizations. And also, folks talked about the acknowledgement that they were elders in the HIV community, really, that no one historically has lived this long. And so, that idea of pioneerism. One man said, "So how do you give back? How do you say thank you for the good health care?" Well, you contribute as much as you can to the social structure. So that idea of generativity ends up being really important, and generativity has embedded in it the idea of reciprocity. So not only are people giving back to the community, but they are getting inside of that giving back, right? So we have a paper out now under review called Giving Back is Receiving. So that ends up being really, really important. So this was just a graphic that we put together for the study, but back to Patty's presentation earlier, I want you to note that in this graphic also there's the issue of time and where it fits in. That time creates experience, but time also is influenced or is part of diagnosis when you receive that diagnosis and the trauma that you might have experienced because of that. The next study I want to talk to you is quantitative and US-based. It's using data from the National Health, Aging, and Sexuality Study, which is the largest longitudinal study of LGBT older adults in the US, funded by the NIH. And we specifically examined the role of social and community connectedness that contributed to resilience and mastery. And in this subsample, we looked at 335 older gay and bisexual men living with HIV, because about 14% of all the individuals enrolled in the NHAS are living with HIV. So specific to the presentation today, we examine factors associated with both resilience and mastery. Social support was measured using 4 items from the MOS, and community engagement was measured using 4 items from questions such as, I help others in my community, and I'm active or socialize in my community. And what we found was that after controlling for demographic variables, both increased social support and community engagement independently contributed to both resilience and mastery. What's important about that, though, is that we also found that resilience and mastery then contributed to psychological health-related quality of life. So you start seeing the connection between the interdependence of social connectedness and psychological well-being. So both of these studies examine the importance not only of receiving social support, but community engagement or interpersonal relationships at a more macro level. It's important to note that in both studies, reciprocity or giving back through generative acts emerge as an important element in managing the psychosocial challenges of aging with HIV. Building methods for giving back or engaging in generative acts is perhaps really important, and we need to think about how to provide and foster those opportunities. So cross-national and cross-paradigm evidence supports the importance of social connectedness, giving and receiving support in positive adaptation to aging with HIV. I think for me, what the takeaway is that we need to stop looking at social support, one, at sort of that individual level where the person living with HIV is always the recipient, right? They're always the recipient of that support, when in fact it's there's much more reciprocity, it's a two-way street, and the community benefits from their experience, their elderhood, if you will, right, and their knowledge, and to see that as just to see that as giving and taking. Last slide are a couple of the publications that this information has been published in. We have a paper on generativity now that's out under review. And here's my contact information if folks are interested in talking about this a little bit further. And I'll be around, of course, the rest of the day. So thank you.